I am Dr. Nelly Kadagi, the director of the WWF RAS-E Train Education for Nature program. And I'm also a fisheries scientist that has spent the last 10 plus years focusing on billfish species in the Western Indian Ocean region. I'm here with Dr. Bruce Collette, who is the chair of the IUCN Tuna and Billfish Specialist Group, and also a fisheries research associate at the Smithsonian. We are here to talk about billfish, what is currently happening in terms of conservation and management, and some of our thoughts about the future of this magnificent species. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you for the welcome. I guess I could start by saying what tuna and billfish are, and they're frequently associated together because a lot of the catch is together, but they're not closely related. They're actually very separate. And I've really spent most of my time on the tunas, the family Scombridae, and a little less time on the billfishes, which are two families, Istiophoridae, the regular billfishes, and Ziphiidae, which is the swordfish.
Okay, so Bruce, for those who are non-sciencey about this tuna and billfish species, can you just explain a little bit how do they look like, given that you spend so much time focusing on them?
Well, the biggest thing is we call them billfishes because they have an elongated snout, a big long paddle, which is round in most of the spearfishes and is flattened in the swordfish. So none of the tunas have anything like this. So that's why we call them billfishes. They have this big long bill sticking out in front of them, which makes them really interesting and particularly interest to sport fishermen who like to catch them because they jump and spin around and provide some excitement for the fishermen.
You've been conducting research on this species in the last 3+ decades. Can you tell us what you have learned?
Well, the first thing was to define the species, and we had to describe a couple of undescribed species of Spanish mackerels, and then we had to assess the species status of things like the sailfish, because there are some slight morphological differences between sailfish in the Atlantic and sailfish in the Indo-West Pacific. So the question was this two species or one species? And genetic work showed that it was one worldwide panmictic, that is, genetically connected species. And so the first step was to define the species. Then I was asked to chair this IUCN group, and we had to do assessments based on all the published knowledge, and we had meetings with many fishery biologists and anatomists and ichthyologists to figure out the status of each species. And the IUCN interest is the species in danger of extinction? If the population gets really far down, then maybe it will go away. And we've had worries in the United States about things like the bald eagle and the American alligator, and those have been restored. So the question was, are any of the tunas and billfishes endangered? And several of the tunas, the bluefin tuna in particular, and several of the billfishes, like the blue marlin and the black marlin, appeared to be endangered. And it's important to note that the red list focuses on species. So some species are in reasonably good condition, but some populations of those species are threatened and need better management. And this is particularly true in your area in the Western Indian Ocean, some species are overfished there, the yellowfin tuna and perhaps some of the billfishes. So we need to look at both the worldwide status of the species, and then we have to try and conserve the local populations. And that's where you and your work come in, trying to maintain the viability of the populations in your area. So, so far, we did a complete evaluation of all 61 species of tunas, mackerels, and tunas that was published on the IUCN Red List in 2011. So IUCN likes these assessments to be redone every 10 years. So I have a small team doing reassessment, and we've reassessed the commercial tunas, and we're in the process of just finishing the assessment of all the billfishes. And then we'll go on to do the mackerels and Spanish mackerels and other species. So we've made good progress, and some of the tunas, the Atlantic bluefin tuna and the southern bluefin tuna, are now in somewhat better shape due to enforcing catch quotas and trying to eliminate illegal fishing. So your work is focused on billfish in the Western Indian Ocean. So what are you seeing that we're missing in, or might be missing in, our global assessments?
You know, Bruce, you bring out a very important point on populations of these billfish species being threatened, and at the same time thinking about area-based specific arrangements. And one of the things we are seeing that maps out to the global assessment is that in a place like the Western Indian Ocean, there's the importance of regional or in-country data to feed into this global assessment, because we might have the large-scale understanding, but this detail level at country or also at local can be interesting in terms of figuring out the fish's interactions with those species. The other thing is also the Western Indian Ocean region, as you may know, is one of the data poor regions, not just for billfish, but also for tuna. And so my work has really focused on making sure that we can bring together countries and stakeholders to think about collective efforts in terms of gathering this data and being in a position to feed into regional and also global assessment. The last thing is also a thing about billfish species is they're highly migratory, moving across different national transboundaries. And so it's the reimagining and rethinking about the interconnectivity between countries, which is important for such highly migratory species. And we've been able to bring different countries together around the idea of making sure that we can share data. So Bruce, you spoke about improved management practices, and this is also related to some of the stock assessment that you've done, and you're seeing that some species in some areas are doing very well. So can you share some specific examples so that our viewers understand how relatively small changes can have a bit of impact on the management and also rebuilding of populations that are threatened?
Yeah, well, first of all the tunas and to some extent the billfishes are managed by regional fishery agencies. And there's one for the Indian Ocean, but the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, in my opinion, has not been as successful as the ICAT, the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas, or the Southern Bluefin Assessment Group. Somehow they haven't been able to get all the countries to agree on quotas, and this makes management very difficult. So in the United States, fishing for billfishes is now restricted to recreational fishing because they create more money from recreational fishermen than the meat is worth as food. And we found that the catch and release rate for using circle hooks instead of J hooks is much better. So the fishermen can catch the fish and have all the fun and let it go, and most of them will then be around to be caught again. So it's important to use circle hooks instead of J hooks. The other thing that helps is changing the mesh size in tuna seining, and if you use a larger mesh, then smaller fish can escape and grow up. In some regions, the mesh size is very small, and that catches baby fish. And we don't want to catch baby fish. We want to catch big fish and let the little ones get away. So those are two practices that could be helpful, but it's sometimes difficult to persuade. Fishermen don't want to change the way they do things. And one of the things you can do in your region is work with some of the fishermen to say, hey, if you adopt some of these practices, you'll ensure that you'll be able to keep fishing. And if we have the mesh size too small and catch all the little fish, then we won't have any big fish. So that's one of the things. Now, I don't know whether you can work with local fishermen to try and improve their methodology or not.
That's a good question, and it's really interesting to hear you mention some of those specific examples for improving management for the tuna and tuna-like species. And just to build on what you've said, it's important. I always say that it's important to work with fishing communities in these areas, because we are thinking about livelihoods and also sustainability of the fisheries when you consider communities that are dependent on them. And so we've been very successful in the last 10 plus years, especially with recreational and artisanal fisheries. The Western Indian Ocean region, when you think about small-scale fisheries, we are looking at over 65% of this group targeting fisheries. And so they are one of the main groups that we have to work with in terms of gathering data, in terms of deploying this management aspects. And so it's been successful. It's still a lot of work because of the transboundary nature of the species, and also just how remote some areas can be. And so there's more need, as I said, to bring together scientists, fisheries managers, and community groups to rethink around sustainability of fisheries. And I think given that these communities have had a long history of fishing, they want to see fishing continue for their livelihoods. So Bruce, I'm going to change topics a little bit and move to a theme that we've had a lot in the new climate change dialogue. And so with the IPCC report on everyone's mind, what are you observing about climate change in relation to your work as well?
Well, as water warms up, many fishes are moving either to escape the warming water or to find a better place for them to catch their prey. And so we have Atlantic bluefin now moving north of the Arctic Circle in the summertime to feed. I just got a record of a couple big eye tuna from the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean has been closed to the entry of some of the warm water tunas like yellowfin and big eye, but now there's valid records of a couple big eye tuna from the Mediterranean. So we have species moving into different areas, which will enhance some of the fishing. But the other area or another problem is in the South Pacific, where many of the islands have banded together to rent their water space to overseas fishing efforts. And they get a lot of income from letting people fish in their waters. But what's happening is it looks like skipjack, which are one of the major species they're fishing, are moving further north into the North Pacific, out of the range of these islands, which means that the fishing nations will be able to pursue the fishing in a different area, but they won't be renting the space from those island nations. So there's a big potential loss of income. So we've got to monitor the movements of these major fisheries, because it's going to impact nations that are losing fisheries and nations that are increasing fisheries. So documenting this movement is really important, and is something we've got to worry about. For example, another example, there are quotas for mackerel in the Eastern Atlantic divided up amongst nations, but the mackerel are now moving north to Iceland and Greenland, which have never been part of those treaties. So we worry about changing our regulation where the fishes are going. So that's another problem. So from your perspective, how might climate change be turned into opportunities in your area?
You know, you bring a very good point, and I would like to put a big placeholder on one statement you said. Nationals or countries that are losing fish and those that are gaining or documenting fish. Now, there is an opportunity there in terms of looking at how we can prepare leaders, experts in these countries to tackle these challenges. It's not going to be an easy challenge, because you think about the fish politics that come with all these shifting dynamics. And so one of the things I see is how we can make sure that experts in many of these places are well prepared, and also developing local experts and strengthening the pipeline of scientists so that we can continue to address these issues and see the positive side of sustainable fisheries. And that's one of the things that I have spent doing in terms of capacity development in my current work at WWF, and also at grassroots level, making sure that we are very well prepared to look at the future or even the current and align ourselves with the implications of climate change and those unexpected uncertainties that are going to be happening, especially to these communities that we care about. So Bruce, again, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to have this time to talk to you about Billfish. And I brought with me this book here that is one of your books, kept me inspired reading about this species, and has really influenced us to write more about billfish species in the Western Indian Ocean and Africa. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you too, because we need local people working on these populations, not just people like me sitting away from the populations. Break.